Um, do you have to leave at 12:30?
I
I'm not super inflexible. I have somewhere to be at 1:30, so
Yeah, me too. So we'll see. We'll see how much we can get done. If not, I'm cutting it short 15 minutes, so I apologize.
no worries.
Okay, so I got a few questions from people, and I wanna get your questions, um, and then I'll go back and start with the ones I got already, and then we'll take it from there. Okay. So Stephanie, what do you have in terms of what you want to talk about?
Oh, um,
Do you have any questions, any reactions, any,
I have some reactions. Yeah,
okay, so hold
yeah,
that thought.
and
Maybe
some
we'll,
questions might come out of that. But if someone
yeah,
has a
maybe we'll
question,
start with the reactions. How about you, Todd? Do you have any questions, reactions?
um one of the questions I had was sort of the similar to the one someone already sent you about like how to introduce some of these concepts during a session. Some I've gotten because I have a client who I think it would work well with. So that was my question, but that's also a general question other people asked you as well. And I'm sure stuff will come up as we go along too.
Yeah. And when you talk about reactions, Stephanie, do you mean to the session?
yeah, it was riveting, and I just realized I do have another question just in terms of the Gottman piece, but just what it might have been like to be in that. I could just hear this, I could just feel the tension and the strain from the husband. It just, like I almost couldn't breathe. So I was just wondering what it was like for you.
Yeah, so remember, I'm used to working with them. I have been working with them for a while.
Hmm.
Hi, Ruby.
Hi.
I've already apologized so profusely. I don't know what to say. So
It's okay. It
I'm just
happens.
gonna keep going. I'm so sorry. Stephanie, I asked for reactions and to the session, I believe is what we're talking about first, and then I have some questions, but I wanna hear the reactions first. And what Stephanie was saying is how palpable the tension was and how riveting it was, what it was like for me to be there. So yeah, this is this was very painful, very difficult, but I want to say that I I they they are so conflict avoidant. Um, and but what that means is that there is so much what I call and other people call mood contagion. Um, so it's very hard for him to talk, as he says, because he's so worried about what she's going to say and do. And and same for her. When he says something, she just gets all rattled and doesn't hear it. She just doesn't hear what he's saying. I mean, what he said in that session, I don't know what I want. Most of the time I think about getting divorced, and he said that at least 2 times prior to this, and she doesn't remember it because she can't hear it. And but that's again part of what one way of thinking about it is to think about it as mood contagion, such a low level of differentiation. um, and in this case, um, they they are so much into their partner's thinking and feeling that they can't talk about what they think and feel, which is a big part of the work here. And so, in addition to that, she gets very rattled, and but he does too, and he was getting very rattled in the session. I mean, he was just
He was like,
really, really uncomfortable. And so what I want to say about this case is that incredibly they have done a really good job with the separation. So they've been separated for a long time, and they're doing a kind of like a nesting agreement where the ones who move out of the house are the parents and not the children. So with this level of difficulty, I have to say that they're managing the separation incredibly well, considering this level of difficulty talking to each other. So, and this is kind of a new subject that we got at the end of the last year, November, December, where this is, so let me talk about one of the first questions I got, which is talk more about the discernment process. So I want to say that this has been a year-long discernment counseling process. So the traditional discernment counseling is about, is a short-term approach where that's best suited for people who are coming in with a mixed agenda, meaning one is leaning in and one is leaning out. And you try to help them clarify whether one of three options. The way Bill Doherty describes it is that the first option is to stay miserably together the way they've been so far. The second one is to engage in 4 to 6 months of in-depth couples therapy work, not to decide whether or not they're going to get divorced, but to work on their marriage to show up differently, and to, you know, to work on marriage 2.0, let's say. That's one of the ways I call it. And to try, you know, to see if there can be any shifts in the way that they're relating to each other, reacting to each other, but not necessarily to decide whether or not they're going to stay together. That they might, in the course of this work, one of them may decide they don't really want to stay together. They may be, and the other one may decide that you know, or they may decide that they do, or they may decide, well, I don't generally talk about outcome in that way, in terms of whether or not they're going to get divorced after working with me for 4 to 6 months. What I say is that the outcome is to show up differently, react differently, relate differently, and that they need to do that regardless of whether they stay together or not. That they need to be able to dialogue differently. They need to be able to react differently, regardless of whether they stay together or not. And that's what I would want to work on and help them with. And so that's the second option, right? The first one is stay miserably together. The second one is you know, engage in couples therapy, where you, and what that means is engage in a process where each of you will look at your own individual reactions to your partner, as opposed to thinking your partner is to blame for all the marriage problems. That's what I mean by couples therapy. Unless I can move them out of the blaming situation, which I tried to do in the 5, 6, 7 sessions of discernment counseling, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how I do that. Unless I can move them out, that's not, you know, they're not eligible for couples therapy. So people who come in and blame the other and don't look at themselves, it's probably not going to work unless I can shift the blame to a request, or I can help them shift the blame to a wish, or I can help them shift, you know, unless I can help them shift out of straight out blaming, the couples therapy is not going to work. Okay, and the third option is that they decide to split. And so I've done this version of discernment counseling. Now this session with this couple is not that version of discernment counseling. The session with this couple is, this has been an ongoing discernment counseling for the entire year. And I think that's actually one of the questions about that. that came in, which is about ambivalence and how do you help a client with ambivalence, which, this one is one of those. But let me go back to the discernment protocol. So just a regular discernment protocol, in those 5, 6, 7 sessions, you first meet with one member, first meet with both of them ideally this would be a 2-hour session where you're working on their divorce narrative, you're working on their marriage narrative, you're working on trying to figure out what their theories are about how they got to where they are, and you get them to talk about what they've done to solve the problems and how they've not succeeded, prior couples therapy or whatever. So that's how you spend the entire time and in the first session. And then you split them and you work with each of them individually at least twice each. And then you reconvene and have another. I mean, sometimes you need a third individual session, sometimes you don't. And then you reconvene, and then that's when the decision process is done, right? They decide do nothing, they decide engage in couples therapy, or they decide to split. And I sometimes do it this way, meaning straight out. And I'll tell you a bit about what I like to do in the individual sessions. So according to the traditional model for discernment, in the individual sessions, you're trying to shift them. You work different. First of all, you work differently with the leaning out than with the leaning in. And let me start with the leaning in. So the goal of the individual sessions with the leaning in is to try to get them to tell you what they have done to convince their partners that they're wrong for wanting a divorce. Because this is what usually happens with the leaning in person, is they don't accept the wishes of the partner. They have very often never accepted them before. And they are trying so hard to convince their partner, the leaning out partner, that he or she is wrong for wanting to get divorced. You're going to throw all this out. You're going to make the kids miserable. You're going to do this to the kids. You're willing to destroy our family. You're willing to, all of those. They go from, one version is the criticism and judgment of the partner who wants it. And the other version, there's some clinging behavior. I beg you, I want to, there's a crying behavior, clinging behavior. There's an attachment panic kind of behavior that results in sometimes coercion, sometimes clinging, sometimes they go from coercion to clinging. And so that's what the work with in the individual sessions with the leaning in partner is. If this is clear. So sometimes it's not that clear that there's a leaning in and a leaning out. For example, in this case, she was leaning out and he was extremely leaning. She was against the separation. You gotta know this about this case. And now in this session, what you see is a flip. So you see her wanting to lean in and saying, "Are you sure? And what do you want? And are you going to tell me? And are you, and he's the one now leaning out or more ambivalent." So there's been a big shift in them. But in straight out discernment, if they present with a straight out leaning in and a straight out leaning out, and I'll talk a little bit, I'll talk about the leaning out, but the leaning in presents often with either clinging or coercive behavior, then the work in the 2 individual sessions with the leaning in is to see if they can stop that and tell them why it is that it doesn't work. You trace it back to, is this the way it used to be? Have you done clinging or coercion before? Well, how has that worked for you? Is it working? Is it not working? What do you think you can do differently? I talk about the anxiety. I talk about the clinging on coercion because they're very anxious about it. They're anxious about their partners not wanting. They're anxious about what they're going to lose. There's a lot of anxiety about it. But part of what I say is that the more you lean in and the more you cling or coerce, the more you're pushing your partner away, which is exactly the opposite of what you want. So that's the work with the leaning in. If you assess that they're doing indeed coercion or clinging behavior. The work with the leaning out is very, very different. The work with the leaning out is to shift from he or she is not what I want to just a general contribution to the relationship distress. So if the person is saying, if the reasons for the leaning out are untreated mental health conditions, abuse, or addiction, then you can, be very, very empathic about it. Nobody should have to live this way. There's been a history of them not doing the work, of them not treating the addiction. And so, that's a piece of the work there. And the other piece of the work with assuming that that's it, right? That there's been these hard issues like abuse or substance abuse or mental health. I'll talk a little bit about how that differs from the other softer issues, like, I don't know if I love him. I don't know if I'm attracted. I don't know. We've been so distant, or we fight so much. I mean, that I differentiate between those issues that are nobody should have to live this way, from the softer issues. I think Bill Doherty call him softer. I don't quite like that word, but from the issues that show that this is a pretty much reciprocally contributed to dynamic, right? So that's what I mean by that. So let me go back to the leaning out person with these difficult issues. So part of the work in the individual sessions with them is to, in addition to empathize, to try to help them discern to what extent they're waiting for their partners to agree to the divorce. In other words, that's when I do a little bit of a divorce education, meaning, in this day and age, true, your partner needs to be on the same page, but true, your partner needs to go through the divorce process, but what the fantasy that people have is this: the leaning out with hard issues wants the other one to agree, wants to also convince the other one that they should want the same thing that they want. I want to get divorced, but I want him to be okay with it. Well, he's not going to be okay with it. He's never going to be okay with it. He may never be okay with it. You gotta own your wishes, and own your desires, and own your position. And he may or may not get there. Of course, the divorce will be better if he gets there. Let's say it's a he. But this illusion that you haven't been able to convince him to treat his mental illness or his addiction, you think you're going to convince him to want a divorce? If you have not had any influence on him, why do you think you will have it now? So some of the work is about dispelling this illusion of what never worked and why there's this idea that it's going to work this time, which is the same position they've had for a lot of years, right? If it's a codependency or if it's a lack, tolerating very negative behavior, or not able to influence the other person. So the work there is on trying to separate what she wants, if it's a he, and from what she wants him to want, which is not going to happen. And if it's the leaning in that's part of the work with the leaning out on when there's less ambivalence about that. Anyway, so and just briefly, what's the work with the leaning out when the issues are not abuse or addiction or mental illness, that's when the work in the 2 individual sessions or 3 is to help them figure out to what extent they've contributed to that reciprocity. And so that's not very easy to do. But that is the prep work that I always do with individuals when I see them individually, whether it's at the start of a discernment process or at the start of a regular process. So, just try to get them to say, to own what I call their side of the sidewalk, to own their contribution to the reciprocity. And how I do that depends on the case. So, but that's the main work there. And then you present, but a big part of what you're doing is tell them about yourself, right? You want to be able to help each of them tell the other about themselves. So, for example, in the case like the one we just heard, if this were a straight discernment case and they were not as painfully limited in their capacity for self-disclosure as these 2 are, I would have her, let's say what she said at the end is a typical thing I would try to get somebody to say at the, as a result of our 2 individual sessions. I would try to get her to say in a joint following our individual, I would try to get her to say what she said at the end, which is, when I didn't show up, I checked out. You checked out first, then I checked out. Here's how I checked out. Now, I didn't make her do that in this session, but here's how I checked out. I drank too much. I understand now the effect that had on you, and I'm willing to try to figure this out, in which case I know I would have to drink less or figure out a way of managing my drinking. Now she's sort of getting there, but I'll tell you more about what happened since. But that's the work of the leaning out to try to get them to explain to their partner their contribution to the reciprocal dynamic. And so that's generally the end of it. They either engage in couples therapy or they don't. And I've seen couples do a number of things. So often they engage in couples therapy and then they get divorced. Often because one of them is working really hard and the other one isn't. And sometimes they engage in couples therapy and that really transforms and shifts their relationship and they can keep going. And I've seen people make a decision, I don't know what I want to do. I'm going to table it and think about it. And that means they don't do the work and they also don't engage with me. So, I've gotten many different experiences with the straight out discernment process. But I do a variation of this, and this one. Okay, so one more option is they decide to get divorced, and so I help them to get there in a way that asks them to develop capacities that if they had them in the first place, they wouldn't have gotten divorced. So it's interesting how that works. And sometimes I've done divorce counseling after discernment counseling. Sometimes I've done information gathering. Sometimes I've done, okay, divorce is a process. What are you going to do to get there? Especially when there's children, the conversations are about how, divorce is not an act, it's a process. There are no rules. There are no written rules about how this will work. You have to just like people nowadays design how to have an equitable, reciprocally pleasant relationship in this complex world, the same goes for divorcing. There is no formula for divorcing, even though the attorneys will make you believe that there is. There are like money formulas, but there is no formula. When do you divorce? How do you divorce? Where do you live? Who leaves? Who stays? the financial consequences, unless you can walk people through a conversation about all that, which if they couldn't have before and they can't have it without you, you can walk them through a conversation about the financial implications, about the disruptive implications, about what is disruptive to kids and what is not disruptive to kids. And you give them, you educate them on the effects of fighting on the children, and you educate them on the effects of what affects children is not divorce per se, it's how the partners operate in front of the children and by the divorce. So so there's so much work you can do once you start on the process of helping them divorce better, which is a huge part of couples therapists work, and I don't think we get trained for that. There's very, very little training on how to help couples who are leaning in, or mixed agenda couples leaning in and leaning out, and who then want to get divorced. Very, very little. And so, okay. So I talked a bit about the discernment process because that was one of the questions. I wonder if you have a question based on what I'm saying.
I was going to ask, what do you do to separate yourself from the legal aspects of a potential divorce? Or are you also required to be part of anything that happens in court, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have it in my informed consent that I will not participate in the legal issues. And it's actually there, but it doesn't make any difference. If his lawyer wants to subpoena my records, he can, and the judge approves it. I have to release them. But I have to tell you, cross the fingers, in all my years I've been doing this work, I have never gotten a subpoena, but I have talked to people who are thinking about giving me a subpoena for the records. And the simplest way I have to answer the question is, it won't look good for you. That's the honest, simple truth. Because I know about both of them. And it's not going to look good for if you partner A want my record because you want to prove A, B, or C about partner B. She could do the same. Partner B can do the same for you. And so generally, even in cases of abuse, there is reciprocity. And even in cases of substance abuse, there's interactional patterns. She comes home at 2 a.m. and he screams at her and breaks the glass. She comes home at 2 a.m. drunk and he, what does he do? He's reactive. I have, with that argument, I have managed to avoid that 3 or 4 times. And the other thing I managed to avoid is I have a good nose for this, and if I think they're coming for that, I stop. I don't do the work. Anyway, that which happened to me once or twice, where I'm figuring out that's what they're coming in for, to prove the other one. Any other questions or comments?
This isn't well thought out, but with if you have sort of a leaning in and the mixed agenda couple, in terms of, and getting the one who's leaning out has a really hard time with the reciprocal idea of like having them tell the partner what they did. At some point, if they just can't see that, they just can't do that, There's not a lot of insight. Are there certain things that you push for, or just sort of try other ways? I mean, they may never get there. And the couple I'm thinking of in my mind isn't thinking about splitting right now, but there is that solo dynamic of leaning in and leaning out. But getting the one who's leaning out, who's had their own individual therapy, who's done lots of processing around it, really wants the other person to do everything and has a hard time saying what they're doing to it. And I'm just wondering, so it's a general, like, how do you get in there? Like, what are some things you might do? Is it just keep trying and plugging
There
away?
is absolutely no insight.
Yeah. I think there might be, but there's so much anger and so much, the language they use is demeaning in a way. And the other one who's leaning in really has little insight. I mean, to their behavior. So there is this, the one who's leaning out has more insight, but is so angry and so kind of like enraged by it that even in session trying to get them to sort of just
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I do with the enraged partner. What I have done. So I actually think, and this is both personal experience and clinical experience. I think when you're ready, your anger goes down.
Yes.
So anger to me is an expression of hope that the other one will change.
Yes.
And it's a protest about the lack of change of the other one.
Yeah.
And so, and with that, what I say is a variation of, look, you have all the right to be angry. You know, I can see why he's or she's made you this angry and resentful. I just have to tell you, anger and resentment has no place in a collaborative, intimate, grown-up relationship. So unless you figure out what to do with that anger and resentment, you're not going to get what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. So you say you want her to be, you know, I've said that over and over to people. I mean, you say you want him to be nicer, kinder, more present, whatever the complaint is. But the way you're going about it is asking and getting, and it's not going to get you what you want.
Yeah.
So you want him to be more intimate. So I've said a variation to this so many times. I just said it this week. You want him to be more intimate with you, but what you're doing is not intimacy enhancing, it's intimacy killing. So I just tell him that. And I said, you have the right to choose. You can choose to continue that. I'm just going to tell you it's not going to give you a different result. So, and it might lead you to divorcing. But the main piece here is anger is hope.
And I feel that in this case, exactly. I would agree with that. Yeah.
So it's hope, it's illusion of control, illusion that she can influence him to do what if it's a she wants him to do. I don't know. Anyway, so that's my answer to that question. Any other questions or reactions? So I can go to the next one about ambivalence. Okay. Well, first, let me address a question that is how to best educate clients about the 4 Horsemen. Somebody else asked the same. Todd, you talked about introducing, Gottman's ideas. So I want to say that, so first of all, my preference is that they identify what they do themselves so that I don't have to be the one telling them. So criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and what's the last one? Contempt. actually, I think that the cascade is criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I think that's how, yeah. So there are lots of self-assessment tools, and I have a myriad of you can find them online. I actually found 2 for you that I can send you through the email. I found 2 self-assessment tools online, but you just Google self-assessment for Horsemen and you get lots of, either true and false or some numbers. Some are better than others. You get, you gotta create or create your own. I actually created my own. You're going to see it in module 8, I think. I can't remember, but you're going to see a document that has what triggered you, which is a Gottman concept, and then ineffective behaviors that are as a result of the triggering. And so I just have them do a check mark it. And then after they check, so people will say, I say mean things to him. I mean, I'm recalling just this week, I say mean things to him. I yell, I call him names. All of that has to come from them. And because I don't like, and then so I'll say things like, either they come from the partner who's doing the behavior, or they come from the partner who's the recipient of the behavior, right? And so I'll say, for example, she tells me I'm lazy. Well, what do you call that? Well, I call that calling me names. Or she, he tells me that I am not interested in sex, which is not true. And what do you call that? Well, he's using when I occasionally am not interested in sex to paint my whole personality or behavior as someone who's not interested in sex. Let's just say that. So I say, oh, okay. So what you're saying is that the way you receive what she says is as a judgment of your character, not your behavior. So, which is the difference between criticism and complaint. So I have the ideas on top of my mind. I know what they mean. I know the definition. I try to get them to tell me what they do. And I try to say, this is a predictor of divorce. That's the clincher is, this is a predictor of divorce. So what the Gottman team found, and I talk about him. I say, there's this guy, he can predict divorce. He's written a number of books. His research team did an amazing job in the last 25, 30 years. We now know what predicts divorce, what doesn't, what you're doing, this, and that are some of what the research team found about being predictors of divorce. That's how I talk about it. And that's how I talk about a lot of other things, like the bids for connection. How do you bid? What is a bid? How do you bid? How do you respond to a bid? What do you do? So I use the concepts to make assessments and to then say, okay, well, when she says she wants to talk to me and I look at the phone, okay, let's see, she says that. When I want to talk to him and he's looking at the phone, I think he doesn't care about me. Let's say she says that. So then I introduce the concept. So when you want to talk to him, you're making a bid for connection. And when he doesn't talk to you, he is answering the bid for connection in one of 3 ways. And he's answering in the way of refusing to respond to the bid for connection. And the research shows that, you have 3 ways of responding for the bid for connection. You can ignore it, you can accept it, or you can propose an alternative. I think that's my addition. I don't know if the Gottman say that, because what I say is, well, you can say, you know, honey, I want to finish reading this article, and how about if after dinner we sit down and we talk? I'm very interested in what you have to say. So that's proposing an alternative time for accepting the bid. But I call it a bid for connection. I say that there are 3 ways. What I say also is research shows that ignoring the bids for connection is predictor of divorce. So I have in my head, what is a predictor of divorce according to the research team? And I have in my head the names of those concepts, and I link them with the behaviors that they're describing. Which leads me to the next topic, which is, somebody asked a question about the tools in the toolbox, and the tools are related to the techniques based on Gottman. So the basic couple maintenance tool with the greetings, appreciations, doing something fun, something new, and the hangout meetings is one of them. And the other tool in the toolbox is the repair tool, the steps to an apology. And so, again, the research team, you could talk about it. You could talk about Gottman in 2 different ways. You could talk about it by saying what predicts divorce, which is not responding to bids for connection, or, doing all those other things when we talked about assessing the 4 horsemen. Or you can talk about it, what predicts stability, right? And what predicts stability is more positive interactions than negative ones. They don't have to be 5 to 1, but they have to be a lot more. And positive interactions include interactions that are not fraught with difficult dialogues. They include fun, they include hangouts, they include responding to bids, they include listening, you name it. You name it. You can tell them what the Gottman team found is what creates a positive interaction and what creates a stable relationship. And that includes more positive interactions than negative ones. And so, and the other thing that improves a relation, that creates stability is the ability to repair. So, how do they repair? Can they have a second conversation that's going better than the first one? Can they interrupt a conversation that's not going well? I mean, this is the main idea that I learned and use from the Gottman framework, is the idea that couples who are in lower brain, which I will talk about in another module, couples who are reactive, couples who are need to learn how to stop a conversation that's not going well. That's the first order of business. So to stop the cascade of criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt, it's to help them know when to stop one conversation that's not going well. That's the main lesson from Gottman. And to stop it in a kind way as opposed to a withdrawing way, and to stop it with a promise to come back. So what you see in couples who are, so this is high conflict couples. The issue is a little bit different with conflict avoidant couples, but with high conflict couples, they don't know how to stop. They don't know when to stop. They don't want to stop. And they don't want to stop for a number of reasons, because they never have a second conversation that goes better, because if they agree to stop, they feel like the issue never gets resolved. I mean, there's lots of reasons why they don't stop. And so that's part of the assessment process. Why is it that you don't stop? And she'll say one thing and he'll say another. She'll say, he follows me room to room. Or she'll say, she doesn't stop criticizing. I mean, you got to assess why it is, how they don't stop and why they don't stop. and get them to a place where they can stop. And so I say, you know, the brain takes about 20 minutes to an hour to calm down. There's no way you can have a conversation if you're not calm. There's absolutely no way you can solve a problem. The other reason why you don't solve problems is because you're not really listening. I mean, to these guys, I would say that you're not listening to the questions. So you know, how do you listen better? How do you listen well? How do you dialogue better? You're not going to be able to solve problems until you actually get what each of you is experiencing. So it's too early to solve a problem. You're not going to be able to solve a problem. You're not going to solve any problem. This is about the content, right? More sex or less sex, or more help with cleaning, or more help with intimate, whatever the complaint is, it's not going to get solved ever if they cannot hear each other's experience, right? That's what, across the board, every couples therapist wants to do that. So, but again, what I learned from Gottman, and sometimes I forget that's what I need to do. And like, you know, 6-7 sessions go by and like, oh my God, they don't know how to stop fighting. So then I have to go back to that. You know, it's essential. It's the first, it's like, and they don't know that they don't know, and they don't know that that's the problem. So that's where the Gottman education comes. So repair and the value of repair and increasing positive interactions. I tell them, your relationship is not going to get better unless you figure out how to not commingle every interaction with a relationship issue. So here's what a lot of couples present this way right now. I mean, I just, that makes me crazy. They each work 10 hours a day. In addition, they have 5 children. In addition, they have, and you know, let's say 2 children is enough. You know, I was exaggerating. I did see a couple with 5 children who worked 10 now, but you know, they have 2 children. They work 10 hours a day. And they don't ever hang out. They don't ever hang out. They don't ever hang out. They don't ever hang out without screens. They don't ever hang out to have fun like they did when they first met. And I'm telling them, unless you figure out a way of beginning to incorporate that, you're not going to get better. I'm just telling you, it's not going to get better. It's up to you. You decide. You want to put in the time, you want to put in the effort. And the couples therapy session is that. It's a no screen meeting. Of course, now it's a screen meeting, but it's a no screen meeting. If you can just help them to incorporate several no screen meetings, and that's the topic of another conversation, and you know, the different kinds of meetings where they're not commingled. If you're playing cards, you're not talking about relationship problems. You can't do that. But you have to have a forum to talk about, a forum meaning a space and a time to talk about relationship problems. If you work 10 hours a day and on the weekends you're, you know, walking around with your head cut off because you have so much to do, then you're not gonna sit down and have a conversation about the problems. So that's what I see a lot of, this illusion that a relationship can flourish and sustain without time, without space for division of labor meetings, for relationship, for the state of the relationship meetings, for meetings about finances, for meetings about long-term and short-term goals, for meetings about problem-solving issues and brainstorming. For, you know, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Any questions or comments about that?
I think that was very helpful. It makes me realize that I don't feel as bad as I do sometimes when I end and I'm like, why aren't we getting anywhere? So
Because they're not doing the work in
exactly.
between sessions, because they want you to do the work. They don't do it themselves.
Yeah.
So again, back to Gottman, you do not only what predicts divorce, but then you do the reverse. How do you build it? What do you need to do to build a relationship that works? And you go through the steps. I think the lesson goes through the steps, and the 7 steps or something. And you can share that with them. This is what research shows. It's not going to happen unless you do this, and that. Unless you apologize, unless you have a second conversation, unless you spend time in meetings, unless you have fun, it's just not going to happen. Which is why I often start with Gottman, because it's so powerful in terms of what predicts divorce and what predicts stability. It's just such an important educational piece. This is why it's so important. If you look to me to solve it, I'm not going to be the one. I mean, I can give you the tools up the wazoo, but if you don't do what you need to do to create a stable relationship, it's not going to. I'm here to tell you, you're wasting your time and your money. And with conflict avoidant couples, that's even more important, because I think the high conflict couples are easier because they really get that. They really get that stuff. It's the avoidant couples that are so hard. The ones avoidantly attached, the ones that are so afraid, like in this example, the ones that have such mood contagion, such low level of differentiation, with so little capacities for tolerating their own thoughts and even knowing what they are. So those are harder. And for those folks, the Gottman stuff, in my view, doesn't work that well. Because you need something, you need to get at the anxiety of why they're avoiding the hangout meeting, and why there's so much avoidance. There's a lot of preliminary work that needs to happen. And I've learned over time, and I think this will get at what Ruby's saying, that I learned over time. Although I have to tell you, I had a bad reaction at the end of this session. I said, I got into lower brain myself, because I said to him, come on now, she asked it twice already. And I wish I hadn't done that, because that was a shaming thing to say. And I wish I had said it differently. But I struggle with this idea, and this is what I have to constantly remind myself, they can't. They don't, because they can't. They're not psychologically ready. They're not differentiated enough. They have too much trauma. They have too much junk. They can't. So I have to help them. And whenever I remember that, it is a lot easier for me. Like sometimes the steps are so ridiculous, like what you see in this session. In this session, you see me walking them through a conversation that, and it becomes clearer and clearer. Okay, I want to get to the ambivalence. So one of the questions was, how do you help a client with ambivalence? Well, first, I want to say a couple of things about ambivalence, and then I'm going to talk about, well, then we'll see. The first thing I want to say about ambivalence is that I try to, I think many couples don't want to get divorced. They get there because they're so frustrated because things are not changing, but they don't really want to get divorced. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that just like I said, anger and resentment is hope. I'm going to say ambivalence is loss of hope. Ambivalence means that the partner who's ambivalent is either not sure or has lost hope that the other one will change. They wouldn't be ambivalent if they see some progress, which is why, in my view, and as opposed to what Susan Johnson with the EFT framework wants to do, the leaning out, the withdrawer, I don't work with that one first. I work with the other one first, because the other one is the one, because the reason the withdrawer is withdrawing is because he or she is losing hope that the one who's not withdrawing, who's pursuing, will change. So I tried to work with the pursuer more than to shift the pursuer more than shifting the withdrawer. If the withdrawer is a leaning out person who's ambivalent about it, the ambivalent, so let's go to this case, for example. This guy is terribly ambivalent, in addition to a host of other things, but he's very ambivalent. And one of the reasons for his ambivalence is that he doesn't know if she's going to change. Now, this is a very clear example of that. Is she going to stop drinking? Is she? And he doesn't say that here, but he's getting ready to say that here. When he says, I want to be able to talk to her without being afraid of her reaction. That's what he's gearing up to do, which he's done since then very well. And we're in the process of talking exactly about that right now. So sometimes, I think ambivalence, that's the third thing I want to say. I think ambivalence makes a therapist anxious. They're paying me. I ought to be able to help them. I ought to be able to know. I ought to be able to tell them what to do. So, and the reason we get anxious because of all of that. And that makes it hard to explore, stay in the tension of the ambivalence, stay in the state of anxiety and tolerate the anxiety of you, the therapist, not knowing what to do, and the client not knowing what to do, and it being okay. So a big part of what I do with ambivalence is I ask them to give me a rundown of experiences of having been ambivalent for a long time and then solving it. And I do that a lot with people, in general. But in terms of bringing in their own life experiences into how they solve them. So this one is a typical one for me. I will say, was there a time when you didn't know what school to go to? Was there a time when you didn't know what profession to choose? Was there a time when you didn't know whether to take a job or not, whether to move or not, whether to have a second child or not? I mean, I just go through it. And I ask them to reflect on those experiences of how did, what happened? What did you think? What was the barrier? What was the trouble? In this case, we would find out that he doesn't want to, because he doesn't know if she's ever going to change her drinking behavior, which she hasn't. I mean, she's beginning to hear that, but she didn't know that or didn't want to hear it, even though he's been telling her that for a couple of years. So, but anyway, so I just wanted to say those three things about ambivalence, Couples don't want to get divorced. Avoidance, I think, is a loss of hope that the other one will change. It could also be, as I said earlier, that they want their partners to want the same thing. And when they realize it doesn't matter, I can want what I want and I'm okay with my choices. You know, sometimes it reflects ambivalence, it reflects acceptance of your own wishes. People get ambivalent because they don't accept that it's okay to want what you want. I don't know if you've had that experience. You start thinking about you start thinking about all, anyway. So that's to explore. Is it because you don't have an acceptance of what you want? And does that have historical roots? Often ambivalence is about not accepting that you want what you want, not being clear about what you want, and once you become clear, can you accept that that's what you want? Anyway, do you have any questions about what I'm saying about ambivalence?
I do not, but I'm gonna sign off really quick. Thank you so much for your time. This was very helpful, but I have to run to another meeting, so.
Sure, thank you.
All right, thank you guys. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thanks.
I want to say, before I go back to your questions and comments, I just want to quickly address that somebody wanted to know about betrayal issues. And there's so much to assess there that I cannot talk about it without knowing more about a situation. Like, are we talking about infidelity? Are we talking about a one-time thing? Are we talking about a long-term thing? How did we find out? How many years of lying was there? How was it discovered? I mean, there's so much to assess there. There are a number of questions that can be asked, and you will actually hear in Module 8 a case of an infidelity issue. So you'll hear some of what, and then at that point in the Zoom call, we'll talk more about it. Any questions or comments about the module, about the session, about what you're hearing?
I have an experience I thought maybe you could throw some light on, Sarah. When you're talking about ambivalence, one of the things that I often notice is that I think that's what you're saying is like people embed what they really want in a whole lot of words. So they kind of purposely muddle what it is they want to say. And it becomes problematic for me to see if I can push them to be clearer, because it seems like pushing them to be clear doesn't, they think they're being clear. They think that they need to have this kind of background of information, when really, if we're going to use that example, the husband would be best served by saying, you need to stop drinking. I know that's difficult, but is one of the, I find that a lot of times they just cloak what they really want in a whole lot of words to try to soften the blow. And then they continue to get the same response over and over again, which is not listening, or they're answering something else. Is that your experience?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Great question. And that happens a lot with mood contagion, conflict avoidant people. And they get so muddled up and it's very unclear, but they don't know that they're being unclear. They think they're explaining things, but they're really not. So all of that is I have that same experience. So what your question is, what do you do with that?
Right, because sometimes I feel like my intuition sometimes is that if I try to, I don't know what other word to use other than push, that I'm also becoming like the person who's
right
pushing.
Right.
And so I don't want to take that alliance. I want to
Right. So that's a great question, Stephanie. And I think part of the answer is to tap into his own, is it a guy?
In the one case I'm thinking of, it's the wife.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in just so I know whether to say he or she. So she, part of the work here is to, just like I asked for an experience of how you solved an ambivalence before, I asked for an experience of what happened growing up to what you wanted.
What happened?
Growing up, what is her experience with what she wanted? So memories of wanting something and how she went about doing it, how she went about getting it, did she get it? How did the caretakers, the primary attachment figures respond
Mhm.
to what you wanted? And very often you get harrowing experiences. I wanted to, you know, especially for narcissistic, with people with narcissistic parents,
Parents. Mm-hmm.
you'll get, I was dreaming with a bicycle. I wanted a bike for my birthday. And then when the time came, my mother, whatever, gave the bicycle to my sister. I don't know. I mean, some of them are terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So, and some of them are not so terrible, but I am, when that happens, so I see the question very clearly. Let me see if I abbreviate the answer. The change has to come from their request to change. So I can see why you feel like you're pushing them. If you're so your experience is this is not clear. So my job is to help them get more clear. So you push them to get more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we all do that. I mean, that's not just you. We all do that because we all want that from them. But unless they want it too, you're not going to succeed.
Right.
So they have to want that too. And the way that but they don't even know if they want it. So you got to get them there. So it's like you need to find a bridge to that. So the pushing for clarity is our first instinct, but we got to find the bridge. How do you get there? So, let's see. So once you access memories of wishing, and she gives you some idea, then you can begin to link you could also stay with the experience of the current, of the current relationship. You don't have to go back. I often go back because I find it a fruitful conversation if I think it's going to be fruitful. But you could also stay in the history of the marriage. Mm-hmm. Tell me the history of you wanting something that you think he didn't want. How did you go about doing that?
Yeah.
And what did you do with that? And what happened? And then what did you do? And then what did you do? Okay. And would you like to do it differently? What would you like to be like instead of hiding, not revealing your wishes, saying them indirectly? What do you want to do instead? So you begin to name what she's doing and the example she's giving you. By the way, she's also a woman, so women are socialized to accommodate. Women are socialized to. No, I would assess that. Is she part of that? Is that a piece of it? So you find the bridge. So you see what you see as a therapist, and that's your path forward.
Okay. You
know that she needs to become more clear. What you don't know yet is what is the bridge. You don't know yet. How are you going to get her to tell you this is what she wants? And then you say, would you like me to help you become more clear?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
So this is what I want for you. Or do you want the same? So it's a little bit like, anyway, so yeah, you got it. Todd, did you want to say anything?
No, I think everything you said has been very helpful. There's nothing particular. No.
Yeah, this has been great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see if there was something else I missed from the questions that people send me. Just want to make sure. Okay. Yeah, one more, this is something I wanted to say. And I guess we could stop at 12:30, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I just want to say that, oh, maybe I already said that earlier, that people switch roles. The leaning in switches to the leaning out, and the leaning out switches to the leaning in. I think I mentioned that earlier, that in that happened in this case. They switched.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So tell me what you learned, if I may, anything you learned from either that was useful to you today. What was particularly useful, either from the Zoom call or from the session that you heard? What was particularly helpful, if you can just say it in 1 or 2 sentences?
Well, from today, you know, as I listen, as I think back on the work that I do when I'm doing couples therapy, you've given some names to things that I either forgot or I just don't actively use, like leaning in, leaning out. Yeah, those kinds of things are really great markers for me because I can organize around. It's just easier for me to organize around when I have a name like that, and so I'm going to listen to the meeting again because that's really useful for me. I can put meaning on top of those kinds of behaviors, and it makes it easier to move forward. I don't feel like I'm
Yeah,
stumbling around as
I
much.
feel like that's a big part of what I do in a session with a couple. I name it. I do. I was going to say that earlier, and it skipped. I name things.
Yeah, it really is useful. It's useful for me as well, so we all start speaking the same language. So everybody starts.
Yeah, right, right. I think it got frozen. Oh, Todd, did you want to say anything else about
I'm still here.
It's my connection. It says unstable connection.
No, I'll jump onto that as well. As the language is very helpful, and even sort of me thinking about coming not an agenda, but thinking about it in a different way, and then also talking about sort of the leaning out, also like anger being hope and all that was just very helpful to sort of to think in my mind again, like that is because it feels, in this case, it feels exactly like, oh yes, and I'm losing sight of that.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful just to sort of think about that.
That was the other one I thought was great. Anger, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you next month.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.